All right, I'm assuming we're live now, so welcome everybody. Tonight we're covering vRealize Automation 7, yes, 7.0 with Jad El-Zein, also known as Virtual Jad. Got some show notes for you once Frapp hits the button. Hop on the conversation using the vBrownbag hashtag either on Twitter or get on to the GoToMeeting and ask your questions there. Don't forget we have other shows going on globally, so check those out. Remember, tonight's guest is Jad El-Zein at Virtual Jad on Twitter. I'm your host, Ahmad Yunus, at Ahmad_Yunus, and our co-host is Jonathan Frappier, at JFrappier. And I'm going to hand it back to Frapp. He has a special announcement.
Awesome, thank you. I have a special announcement. Is that Commitmas? Don't forget about Commitmas, everyone, which we just wrapped up actually literally 5 minutes ago for day 2. We'll be back tomorrow. But yeah, so special announcement. Folks that have been around the vBrownbag for a few years probably know what's coming up. But for those that don't, every year we, in conjunction with a bunch of sponsors, we do this end of year giveaway, a lot of awesome prizes that folks can enter to win. There's a blog post that's literally being published now with the sign up link so that you can fill that out and get any number of excellent prizes. We got a bunch of books to help folks learn this year from Pearson and Packet Publishing, from our own Nick Marshall and Lauren Malhoit. We've got a 1-year vMug Advantage subscription from the Indianapolis vMug. We've got some VM Turbo swag, actually 2 full conference passes to Nutanix Next for next year, along with a 2-night stay at the Wynn in Las Vegas. So if you were looking to get out to Nutanix Next, you might have a chance to win the pass and the hotel. You'd have to pay for airfare, but I think that's pretty good prize. And we've got some more stuff. We've got networking for VMware admins and a really cool Lego Star Wars kit courtesy of Rubrik. We've got a NAS coming at you from Infinio along with NFR license for their software. So if you've got a home lab or you've been thinking about putting one together, this will get you a nice head start. You'll get some storage acceleration from Infinio. We've got a really cool drone from Data Gravity. I'll think I have the link in the sign up form. If not, I'll make sure I update that later, but it's pretty awesome. We've got a home lab kit based on the Nook from Ahmad, myself, and Kyle Rudy. And we've also got some Raspberry Pi 2s from Tintry. So that sign up form is out there. Feel free to have at it. 1 sign up per person. Whoever the guy was last year that thought he could get away with using different email addresses in the same name, I'll find that one too. So please, give some other folks a chance to win some really cool prizes. And with that, I am going to hand it over to you. So you should have presenter now.
All right. Yeah. All right. So which screen do you see?
We see the old school Apple.
All right. Do you see login now?
We do.
I do.
The Citrix stuff. I don't know, man. All right. All right. So, guys, thanks again for having me on. I've been doing a lot of VRA7 talking and speaking and traveling. Nice big global roadshow coming to an end as we prep for the GA, which is on target for mid this month. Don't hold me to that because it is software, but at the end of the day, I think we are doing pretty nicely in executing on that. So look for VRA7 to GA this month, and we're doing a lot of just phenomenal things around the new release. And I'm going to focus on 1 or 2 major components, and one of my favorites among a couple others is the Converged Blueprint Designer. But I'm going to kind of get to there. I'll set you up. I'll start it up slow, and then we'll get into the pinnacle of the show here. But for starters, I think the idea, we were shooting around ideas earlier, and I think that the plan is to have some of these spotlight features focused, or give each one of these big features a significant amount of time and focus and deep dive, because it's absolutely impossible to cover all the new stuff in about an hour or less than an hour. So anyways, with the CBP, Converged Blueprint, also known as the CBP or the Unified Blueprint, it changes a whole lot of things. But what you're seeing right now is the new login screen. And this new login screen is brought to you by the VMware Identity Management Solution, VIDM. I just recently posted a pretty lengthy blog post on what VIDM plus VRA7 means. It actually opens up a whole lot of greatness as far as how to position, how to use, how to consume VRA, and where it fits in the overall ecosystem of things in both public and private clouds. And this also allows us to do a lot of branding. You're seeing a pretty basic gray-black screen right now with the VMware effect in the backdrop. But we now totally support branding and the ability to customize this splash screen as well as the logo screens, and then the overall branding within the UI like we've always done. So logging in, you're going to notice, okay, wow, this is VRA7, but a lot of it looks pretty much the same. We land on the same home tab. We've got a lot of the same parent tabs, catalog, item requests, etc., depending on what your role is. But at this point, VRA7's focus was, the vast majority of VRA7 was on scalability and the ability to integrate into the ecosystem and to truly fit into the center of that ecosystem. So if you've seen probably several different slides on VRA in the past, and in some slides we present VRA sits nicely in the middle and everything's plugging into VRA, and in some other slides, especially like the whiteboards and stuff I do, VRA is the very top and consumes the entire infrastructure and automates it and delivers it as a service, etc. Both of those are actually very accurate, and both of those are alive and well in VRA7. But yes, when you do log in to VRA, you're expecting this major shift. Because it is a major version, it's actually not. But what we are going to talk about today is where one of the biggest UI shifts happen, and that's right here in this design phase. So since we're jumping right into CBP, I just wanted to kind of talk about how we got here, right? So VRA7 also comes with a significant amount of what we call time to value, which means if we look at 6x and look at how we get to where we are with 6x, there's a lot of pushback or feedback from our field and our customers in how we got there, right? The solution itself, once stood up, is just spectacular. We can do a lot of great things. The extensibility, so on and so forth, is among the best in the industry. But the complexity of standing the solution up has always been a problem. And 6x, even 5x after the acquisition of Dynamic Ops, that's continually came back to us as, okay, we really need to address this. And the other thing is the footprint, the total footprint as we deploy and completely integrate VRA, the solution, in a highly available infrastructure, enterprise-ready, production deployment of VRA. We're talking about, a dozen to 20 machines just to run the solution. So to get to this point, we have done a tremendous amount of good in reducing the deployment architecture. And I'm pointing on my blog here because I just finished the first 5 posts of this series, which will get us up to what I'm going to talk about today. So we've completely re-architected the solution, reduced the entire appliance-based footprint from 9 to 10 machines down to 2, which is automatically, through the deployment wizard, automatically built, configured, and deployed, including the IaaS Windows parts, all done for you, all done with a wizard, wizard-driven UI. When you log in after the first OVA download, you deploy it into vSphere, you log in, pops up with a wizard, and walks you through the entire process, whether it's single monolithic type of architecture or production-ready production-ready distributed architecture, the wizard does it all for you. In fact, you can get this to a point where you don't even have to log into a single Windows machine and build any of those prerequisites. Now, those Windows machines are still there, sure, absolutely, but how we get there has completely changed, and it takes, you know, a several day, a week, maybe even 2 weeks of a production implementation down to about 2 hours or a day, which is just absolutely spectacular. End-to-end, totally configured, and walks you through all the, you know, the data center level components, like what do I build my VIP, what FQDN do I use, what about my certs, where do my certs go? Previously, with about 20 machines distributed, let's just say, you know, 2 per service, that's about, you know, 8 to 10 certs that we had to manage and lifecycle, et cetera. Reducing that footprint was one of the big focuses. So huge amounts of good. Once it's installed, once it's implemented, you never really revisit that again until you're scaling out. But it's such a critical part of what we're doing with VRA 7, and certainly one of the reasons why a 7.0 version was justified. We even help you get started, meaning the what's called the initial config. After I deploy, I have that reduced architecture, I have an end-to-end wizard-driven configuration and deployment strategy, and then we even take it a step further and say, hey, since you're already at this point, why don't we go ahead and build all the initial logic for you? Because the second most complex part with VRA was, okay, great, I got it stood up. Now I got to go build my endpoints and my fabrics and my business groups and my reservations and those VDCs, and I got to consume all of that, and then I got to, you know, define templates as blueprints, and I got to build policies around that, and I got to entitle them and publish them. You get it. All of that now is driven by an automated X as a service that is driven by out-of-the-box content. So it'll actually walk you through the initial configuration of, you know, what's your endpoint, where is it? In this case, it would be vCenter, for example. And I point to vCenter, I'll actually configure all the initial logic, I'll run an inventory, and I'll come back to you with a task and say, hey, I've just collected, you know, these 20 templates from vCenter. Do you want to make them as blueprints? You just tick each one you want to make as blueprints, and voila, it'll actually configure all of that stuff for you, and then you're ready to entitle and make them available in the catalog. So completely different. I even joke that you know, even my managers, actually my manager can probably do it with his eyes closed, but even some managers within VMware could now deploy the solution very rapidly, very quickly, and it just adds that time to value, that TTV. And then finally, the identity management, right? So this is all the initial components. Identity management replaces vCenter SSO to take us to a point of cloud scale where vCenter SSO kind of drops off as the administrator, single sign-on, and authentication provider solution, while VIDM is the, you know, the cloud native, cloud scale, SaaS-based, initially SaaS-based solution for identity management, and we were just very well positioned time-wise and architecture-wise to just consume VIDM as the engine for all things authentication, access, and authorization, as well as role-based anything in VRA 7. So all of those things come together. I configure my templates my tenants as I always have. I log in, and here I am. Customize my little home screen so I don't drop into a blank page, which is the default, unfortunately. And through portlets, I can go in and customize how this thing looks. Okay? So I just gave you kind of the cliff notes of how I got here, and now we're going to start getting into the real sexy things. Lots of really awesome innovations. Another one of those posts is kind of the overview of everything we're going to share, and that's this one, the Spotlight features, what's new. Take a look at that, and you get a good idea of everything that's happening. But where we're going to focus, at some point we'll cover extensibility in a future session maybe. We'll cover a lot of what we're doing with what's called the event broker, and I know we've already had some conversations about what would that look like, etc. But you will notice, for anybody who's used VRA in previous versions, To define IaaS services, infrastructure as a service, we'd go to the infrastructure tab. We were given the appropriate role to do this. And then in the infrastructure tab was my blueprints. In blueprints, I go and I start building my blueprints, and I start doing all kinds of great things. The CBP, the Converged Blueprint Designer, changes all of that. It brings everything, IaaS, X as a service, application authoring. By the way, no more external app services component. It is all converged into vRA's native appliance. App authoring, network authoring, and network consumption all built right into the CBP. And to get started, we go in here, we start defining things like, what do I care about? What do I want to build? What is this service? Again, if you're familiar with vRA, the Advanced Service Designer has been renamed as X as a service. And a lot of that, once you get used to the new name, which makes sense, it's the XaaS blueprint. We call it XaaS. You come in here and you build your blueprints just like you would anything else. And here I've got an X as a service blueprint that is leveraging a VRO workflow. And by the way, VRO, anybody who needs to know, hey, what skill set do I need to pick up to be a master at this? It is VRO. VRO, VRO, VRO. By far, the most important thing after getting used to the logic and the configuration and how to deliver and build services is, how do I customize the heck out of this thing using VRO? And when I say customize, I don't mean, roll your sleeves up and start building custom workflows and API anything, right? Or PowerShell anything. I'm talking about using out-of-the-box stuff and then making some very minor modifications to deliver a service the way you deliver it. So a lot of this is very familiar or very much the same as 6X. We introduced the Advanced Service Designer, now called XaaS, and it allows us to basically dig into vRealize Orchestrator and point into any existing out-of-the-box workflow, and in a matter of clicks, I can deliver that as a service so that I can quickly, for example, what I'm doing right now is creating IP pools leveraging NSX as a service. Now I can go and I can publish that as a catalog item, or I could publish that as a day 2 operation, a custom action, so that I can make changes at any time, right? This is just one of a billion examples. You can quote me on that. So anyways, the big change that happens with X as a service is what I do next, right? I don't just publish it as a day 2 operation or as an or as a catalog-based service. How I consume X as a service and anything in that matter completely changes. I'm kind of leading up to the grand finale here, or the grand stage here. The next piece of that is software components. So now before I'm building a multi-tier, very complex application, I'm going to build the individual software components. Here in the Design tab, we have something called Software Components. And Software Components replaces what used to be Application Services and Application Director before that. Application Director was amazing at what it does and what it did, right? The only problem is it was very unnatural to use. It kind of came together after the DynamicOps acquisition, and VMware said, okay, let's see how we can make this fit. And the App Director component today works very well with vRA, but everything is done in this whole separate UI that cannot be made highly available, by the way. And I configure my application services, I do multi-tier apps, I build this beautiful blueprint, and then I publish it to vRA. vRA says, oh, look, I got this application service and these custom properties, publish that to the catalog, and then it can be consumed. It's very disconnected, kind of piecemeal type of solution, but for the customers who wanted that level of capability and granularity of application authoring, it is just amazing, right? So one of the aspects of vRA 7 is to simplify the entire thing. Everything has to become natural. Networking, application authoring, and X as a service or anything as a service authoring has to be natural. So app services comes in and it becomes app authoring as an extension of vRA. It is native, highly available with the native code base, and it is brought right into this Design tab as you see here. So with software components, I'm just building what I call software, right? So here I've got, actually there are several, wherever you see VMware sample, these are out-of-the-box components that we're going to ship with vRA 7. So talk about quick start. We're going to ship with these components that say, hey, here's a rapid methodology or a rapid blueprint on how quick, to get you up to application authoring to a point where you're doing SQL Server and SharePoint Server, et cetera, very quickly. And we're talking mostly about how I've leveraged these out-of-the-box content is to understand how VMware did it, so I can now better position my own applications and custom applications. Now, some apps are very straightforward. Let me go ahead and open up my Apache server, for example. So here's an Apache service. In some cases, we can build Apache using a couple of YUM lines, right? It's very straightforward, and essentially what I'm doing here is building the definition of what that would look like and which series and which lifecycle state would I build and configure the various aspects of what I would call, installing Apache on a Linux box. I've also got this opportunity to build custom properties. So let's just say I have custom applications or values in here, and I want the user, or at least the application author, to be able to define which port I use. If I'm using non-standard ports, for example, I want that input to be available, and I want it to then be dynamically bound to any other component on the blueprint. And I'll show you what that looks like momentarily. So here I'm using these properties. I've got default values and types, etc. And this is very straightforward, right? It's the name, the description, the type, and a value. And then I can determine whether it's encrypted, whether I'm allowing override, is it required, and is it computed. Then I hit next, and I'm going to actually lay out all my scripts. So what does it look like to install Apache? And it looks, actually, it's a bash script, and it looks exactly like this. Now this one's not very complex, it's a little more complex. You can probably do a Google search and grab this and paste it into any bash script and build Apache, right? Apache can be built from a couple of lines, or it can be more generic, not necessarily generic, but more open in a way where I can actually install Apache on multiple operating systems. So I don't have to build a definition for CentOS and Ubuntu and Red Hat, etc. I can have one script that I can drag and drop on top of any IaaS component on top of any platform, which is sexy as hell. I'm sure I'm going to get quoted on that one. So here's the script, and I'm just saying, here's what you do. This is what I call installing Apache. And it's a script that's actually going to consume the properties I've defined in the previous stage. And I've only defined 3 properties here. We've got a lot more complex scripts, if you could imagine. But the vast majority of our customers who are going to consume this stuff already have very significant, very complex scripts that they're going to just copy and paste and bring right into here, and then add the capability to do custom property overrides and stuff like that. The script type, bash command and PowerShell, basically should cover everything you need to build a new application. And then the lifecycle stage, install, config, start, and destroy. And then we can determine whether or not we want to reboot. So here we're saying if this application component is dragged and dropped onto the canvas, when it's time to execute, install based on these properties and this script, reboot if needed, and then at the config stage, go ahead and do these other things. And config could be application specific or whatever. And obviously Windows and Linux both supported with the PowerShell support in there. So now I'm going to hit next, and one more piece here is this. I skipped that part. One more piece I can do when I'm building a new application is this container field, and the container field says, okay, is there a dependency, a parent of this application that you are configuring here, you're building? So in that previous example, I'm building Apache, and my as an enterprise application author or application architect, I can say this can only be dragged and dropped on top of a Red Hat machine running version 7. And so I'll build that Red Hat IaaS component, and actually I'll tie that in as a container. Now, if this is an Apache configuration script designed, or let's just say it's a WordPress configuration script that needs to run on top of Apache, then I could say I want this to have an Apache dependency, which means I can't drag and drop a WordPress config on top of a MySQL box. WordPress config needs to drag and drop on top of Apache, and this is all going to make sense when I show you the blueprint. So we can do these dependencies, or we can simply say a machine, right? Makes sense. It's straightforward. I can drag it and drop it onto a machine. And just like any service, once I build the application definition, I'm going to go ahead and publish it, and then it becomes available in my library. So at this point, I've got an X as a service called Puppet something. I've got software components where I can go and define all kinds of custom software configurations, something as very basic as, here's one, .NET, for example. I can drag and drop .NET. If we look at what it takes to install .NET, it's a couple of lines, and I pull it from the Windows 2012 installer. So it's
I think
really
.NET's probably right.
.NET would be great. That's the theme for VRA anyway, one day. But then if we look at SQL Server, it's a lot more complex. And again, this is an out-of-the-box config, so it's great. For SQL Server, and this is something just about every enterprise deals with, how do I automate the implementation of SQL Server? So we're going to deliver this for you. You go in here and you change these values to point to your repositories where your code bases are, where your installer code is. And you can make any changes. You can actually make this dynamic and allow the user or even the requester to enter this value if this is a total path shop, right? And then username and password, and I could even encrypt it. So for passwords, for example. So this is a lot more complex, and if you look at the script and what I'm doing, consuming those properties, you'll see the actual properties show up every time I have a dollar sign, right? File share. So I'm bringing all of this stuff dynamically. So the script can be a lot more agnostic, and then the properties are dynamic, and then it all comes together at build time, which is pretty awesome. And this is actually a pretty straightforward SQL config. Anyway, enough about software authoring. So I've built all my software, and again, software authoring is an option. It is available at the VRA enterprise level, and it is the replacement for vRealize application services or application director, depending on how long ago you got into that infrastructure. Okay, so I got a bunch of different ones. Now let's just say I'm ready to go. So I jump over to Blueprints. Everything is done under the Design tab. Now my Blueprints, again, I've got a lot of out-of-the-box examples that VMware will ship. SQL Server, totally available out of the box. SharePoint, totally available. You just go in there and change the properties to point to your local repos, and voila. It's pretty awesome, actually. Got some AWS stuff in here. LambJ and LAMP also both out of the box that VMware is making available. And then everything else, those are the four. And then at GA and beyond GA, we'll be publishing a lot more out-of-the-box stuff on Solutions Exchange that you can download and just get up and running really, really easily. So it's pretty sweet. Now, let's build a new blueprint. And I'm going to hit New. Now, this is where the major UI changes happens. So let's say Brownbag app 2.0. And this is the greatest thing. Yeah, we'll call it Bread. All right, this might be familiar, archive days. If you're familiar with previous versions of VRA, all this looks pretty similar, or at least it'll behave the same, except we have nice info buttons that kind of walk you through now, which is really great. You'll see NSX settings. One thing to note with VRA 7, although not required, NSX becomes a natural extension of VRA 7. It's that consumption model of drag and drop networks that makes NSX kind of a no-brainer because of what we can do with NSX, and I'm going to definitely jump into that in a bit. It is not required. Using vSphere or any endpoint-based networking is still the standard, but once I have NSX at play, consuming NSX is it's just awesome, streamlined, totally. But to do that, I want to determine first which transport zone I want to use, and in this case, I have a global transport zone. I could do total app isolation, also known as total microsegmentation, and I could isolate the entire app, and I could isolate the individual components. Custom properties at the application or deployment level, I can plug in here, but of course, I can go in here and do this at any time after I start building. This is the new Converged Blueprint Designer, the Converged Blueprint Canvas, the Unified Designer, the whatever you want to call it. CBP is the official acronym. Converged Blueprint is the official technology. The canvas is the official thing, okay? And the fact that it's unified is, I guess, also official. So you're going to see a lot of those, a lot of that terminology kind of intermingled there. So I've got machine types, software components, my blueprints, networking and security, and X as a service. If it's a category, if it's got an inventory, I can drag it and drop it onto the canvas. So starting with the machine itself, here I've got a vSphere machine. And that vSphere machine in my vBrownbag app, I'm going to call this web, just make it simple, web 1, web tier 1. The reservation policy, a lot of this stuff should be very familiar for anybody familiar with previous versions. Use group defaults and instances, how many do I want to build, and what's the maximum. Build information, I got a server, config, let's go link clone, clone from, and you'll notice also the, it's quite zippy actually. Make this a CentOS machine, automatically goes to the, because it's a link clone, it wants to use the latest snapshot, or I can actually click on a snapshot as I see fit. And still no drop down for the customization spec, boo. Okay, resources, CPU, memory, storage, etc. And then networking, as you can see here, I cannot add a network yet because a network does not exist on the canvas. And same with security. Okay, and properties, machine level properties, I can certainly do right there. So next step is to actually start dragging and dropping networking. Now, let's take a pause for a second. One of the other awesome additions to the CDP is the ability to consume existing blueprints. Because as an app architect, I'm not in the business of defining what OS I want to use, what the template is behind that OS, or if I'm using link clones versus which snapshot for the link clone, and so on and so forth. As an app architect, I just want to build my application. The infrastructure folks, the data center folks, are responsible for the standards of building my CentOS, Red Hat, Windows, etc. I am not in that business. So let's cancel out of all of this. Not out of all of this. Let's cancel that one. Okay. We're back to our blank canvas. Let me go ahead and see what my enterprise IaaS guys or my infrastructure folks have made available for me. I click on the blueprints category and I can see all the blueprints that have already been built that I can go ahead and consume. Now these don't necessarily have to be entitled, they just have to be published, which means they may or may not be accessible as individual items, but from an app authoring perspective, these are my consumables. Now of course, if I knew enough, I can go in and I can build my own stuff, or I can just say, hey, corporate has built me the CentOS 6.7 base machine, I'm going to drag and drop that. And I'm going to bring in a nested blueprint right on top of this canvas. So this white box around the actual machine tells me that this actually lives in a different dimension. But I'm going to consume it as if it is a native component. But what I can't do is go in here and change the configuration, like changing the clone from, right? Or changing, I can change CPU memory, but I can't change how many of these instances I'm allowed to deploy. So it's really great for standards. And again, you have the option of defining your own IaaS or having just the app author role in that all I can do is consume. Okay? So I've got my CentOS machine, and I'm going to start building this thing out. First thing I want to do is continue where we left off. I'm going to bring in a network. NSX integration means I have drag and drop networking of all NSX services. So I could bring in an on-demand routed network. And on-demand routed is backed by NSX, and all NSX services are backed by a network profile in VRA. And here's my 172 network, which exists nowhere in my data center except in this virtual world. And I've got my DNS and IP ranges that are used by that policy. So once I drag that and drop it, it becomes a network that I can consume. Now the other thing is I'm all about microsegmentation, and this is going to be my web tier. So I can go over here and say, and just say, this is definitely going to be my web tier. I want to add a security group. Again, NSX playing a huge role here, if you wanted it to. And my web tier has a policy that my corporate CISO guys are enforcing, saying only 443 and 80 is allowed around this machine. This can be total isolation of this tier or individual services or ports, and this is all defined through NSX Manager and the vSphere web client. Now, to plug into that, I'm going to click on my component, and now I can see, because a network is available on the canvas, I could link to it. And because a security group is available, I can link to it as well. It's pretty sweet. So let's see, I've got my web tier here. The other piece of this is a database. We've got SQL. There's also a MySQL component, which I have not published yet. But let's just say CentOS is going to talk back to SQL. So let me drag and drop the SQL component. And you can see SQL, this is actually the out-of-the-box component that VMware provides with all the scripting and components built in for you. Now, obviously, you want to go in there and adjust it for your repos, but essentially that's what it is. I'm going to plug that into the same network, or I could have a dedicated network. So now that that network is available, I'm going to create a NIC and plug it right in. I don't want to plug it into the web tier security group, so I'm going to actually go in and either I could actually do a dynamic one, on-demand security group, if I know the policies I want to use, or let's just see my CISOs have, or my network admins have a DB tier security defined for me. And I'm going to bind that to the machine. All right, so let's start building applications. So now I have a single network. In fact, this environment has a backup strategy that requires a dedicated NIC for backup. So let me go ahead and drag and drop another vSphere-based network on my native LAN, or my native VLAN, what I call the production VLAN, and then add another NIC to each, or to just the web tier, because the database is actually backed up separately. We'll just assume, we'll use our imagination. Now I have this multi-homed CentOS box, one on this 192 network and one on the 172 network. The scripts that I'm going to use to build applications on top of here, or any customization at that, are going to be created as in a way that I'm consuming the appropriate networks. I can make any changes I want. Now, of course, I can just get rid of that and pretend none of that actually exists, but I'm just showing you the art of the possible here. Now, let's assume I also, as a company standard, I always have 2 machines as part of my web tier. So now I'm going to take my load balancer, bring that up, drag it and drop it. I'm going to call this my vBrownbag load balancer 1. The machine I want to load balance, which is that CentOS box. The NIC I want to use, that I'm going to build the VIP on internal, right? And then the external VIP network that I want to use to consume from a consumption perspective, right? I could have it external if I support it on the 172, or I could have it where everything is coming in to 192. But I don't have a NAT policy, so I'm going to go ahead and do 172. Which ports I'm going to load balance? We'll just say all of them. And just like that, I've added an NSX load balancer to my web tier.
Were those ports that were available in the load balancer, was that because you had that defined in the security policy, or was that just something already in the load balancer template?
Yeah, those are the default ports in the load balancer. So it's HTTP, HTTPS, and TCP, and these are available via NSX policy on the vSphere side.
Cool. Thanks.
And just FYI, NSX, it says NSXV. It's just vSphere that I'm able to drag and drop. We still don't have NSX into Amazon because that's just, they're not going to let us do that at this point. And some of the other platforms aren't going to have NSX. This is very much focused on vSphere. It's one of the values of NSX, right?
Hey, Jad,
let's jump over to.
I actually have a question. Yeah. So I know you mentioned that once you connect to an endpoint, it's going to go out there and look at your templates and can bring those in. But are there any default blueprints included out of the box?
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. So we're going to ship VRA 7 with 4 blueprints that are available as YAML zip files embedded into the appliance, and then use Cloud Client to push them into VRA. Another session, we're going to talk about Cloud Client and YAML. Actually, I was going to get to that at the end of this preso as well. But those 4 blueprints are SQL Server 2014, SharePoint 2013, the LAMP stack, and the Java stack. These are all out of the box. And when I bring them into VRA, obviously, if it's pointing to a template called Windows 2012 R2, I'm going to go in there and make the adjustment for it to actually plug into a template that actually exists in vCenter, right? Because we ship these blueprints, and when you go in and configure the blueprint, it's going to say, point me to the master, and you're going to go and point to that Windows R2. So we're not shipping any actual OSs or codes. We are shipping the wireframe that defines what a machine is. I can actually show you what that looks like in a second. So these 4 are out of the box, plus whatever we ship on Solutions Exchange moving forward. And see this, what I'm building right here? I could actually export this to YAML, either over API, which is yet another session, or Cloud Client, export every single thing, including the scripts and the individual software components, into a single zip file. It's about under 100K, and send it over to Emad, for example, and say, hey, run this in your VRA environment and customize it and let me know what you think, or call it a version 2. So I can send exactly what I'm building here as a YAML file, which is one step closer to Tosca standard today in VRA 7, or when VRA 7.
So basically, we'll have a blueprint marketplace at some point.
Absolutely, absolutely. I imagine that's gonna start almost immediately, right? Instead of today, we do a lot of wheeling and dealing of workflows and scripts and such. It's gonna be like, check out my YAML file, right? This is a multi-tier SharePoint infrastructure. You import it, you make the modifications for your logic, and voila, you've got this blueprint ready to go. I'll show you that if we have time in a sec. Okay, so the final piece here, I've got this Apache thing, right? So I'm going to jump over to Software Components, and I'm going to bring in my Apache server. Now, watch as I bring in my Apache server. I'm going to take it on top of this .NET code. It won't let me do that because I have a parent dependency of machine, right? I could actually make this a little more foolproof by controlling exactly what I can drag and drop it on. But if I go over here to CentOS, now I can do it. I can configure the properties. These are all available in that script that I showed you. And I can go in here and I can start editing. The other thing I can do is bind it. And once I bind it, I can use, I can actually bring in a lot of my bind commands to say, hey, there's another property on this canvas. Go ahead and just pull whatever that is and bind it as the host IP address. So let's just say that this script to run Apache, or let's just say it's any application configuration script, I need to feed it the database IP for it to run an application install. So I can bind it to the IP address of my SQL server, right? Which is pretty awesome. Now here, we've got all kinds of different bindings, but here we can bind it to my SQL server. And that also gives it a dependency. Now, if I had different types of, there's all kinds of different ways to bind things. I can bind between IaaS, I can bind between X as a service, and I can bind across blueprints and networks. So if you start thinking about the possibilities here, it's pretty tremendous. So I've drag and drop Apache. The other thing I want to do, here's my JBoss application server. Now, that's going to run native to the machine. And again, I've got my own properties here that I can go and configure if I allowed it to be configured. And then let's just say here's a web application, which one should I use here? Okay, the Dukes Bank web application. Now, I can try to drag and drop that onto the machine, but it's a web application. It's looking for Apache. And when I configured this thing, I said, you need to be on top of JBoss. Okay, and then I can build my bindings. Now, one final piece here is the build order. Now, I can't build this application component until my database is completely stood up. I also can leverage existing databases in the infrastructure by representing that as an X as a service customization script, or as just a blank component. And then I can say, hey, when this comes up, plug into X as a service, and then go ahead and plug into my SQL database. And that X as a service customization script can be dragged and dropped, and all it's doing is binding an on-prem, already existing SQL cluster to this application's dependencies. But to make sure that SQL Server is built first, and then I built this tier, I can do it at any one of these layers. Let's just say I want both of these OSs to build at the same time, but it's only the configuration of the application that I care about dependency. I can take it wherever I see this little circle. I can take that and drag it. And I can drag it to any dependency that I want to make sure exists before I build this application. And in this case, I want to make sure that the SQL component is configured itself, right? I could also do this at the parent and say, hey, don't even start building CentOS until that SQL component is built, or until at least this OS is built. And I can build that dependency. And you're going to build it in the direction you want to use. Now, finally, when I'm all done with this, I'm going to add it all into a Puppet classification. So I've built this X as a service Puppet, which took me probably 45 seconds. I'm going to drag that and drop it. Let's move it here onto the canvas. And I'm going to say, once all of this is built, I want to add my CentOS machine to that Puppet classification. And what does that mean? I could actually have the inputs done by the user at request time through custom properties, or I can make them static and say, hey, this always goes to whatever my whatever that classification may be, production, and we'll add it to the production manifest. It's pretty sweet. I'm going to save, or I'm going to go ahead and finish. I think I bound everything properly. Nope. Non-existent component, we're just going to ignore that. That just means that I have a dependency that doesn't exist on my canvas.
There needs to be you'd want to Visio button there too.
Exactly. So, believe it or not, it's coming actually. So we're looking at future versions being able to export from that canvas to PDF to, I think Visio is down on the list because we want it more generic, but at the very least PDF, so you can say, look, here's my application. I want you to support this however you want to support it. But ultimately, you're going to go and you're going to publish that, and from my catalog items, all my catalog services are there. I could have my XaaS services as standalone, or I can drag and drop that as part of a bigger canvas. IaaS, just my base OSs. My platform services, we saw the Duke's Bank there. And then this is, again, still beta. This isn't GA code, so these icons are a little bit ugly. With every build, we've filled in some of these icons, these minor little adjustments. But as you can see here, what I required for JBoss is if I had it bound, I wouldn't have this requirement. But if I said require input from the user, the requester at this point will say, who's my content server, and plug that in here. And anywhere where I had a requirement for user input, it would show up here as well, and it won't let me submit this request until all is said and done. The other cool thing is after it's been requested, this one might have been expired already, I could now go and watch the deployment actually happen piecemeal by piecemeal by going into my execution information, and this shows me the whole workflow. And in this case, I had just a single machine. In a multi-machine, I'd have all the lists, including all the networks, all the application components, so I can do any sort of due diligence if my script failed or anything like that. Now, finally, what I wanted to show, let me show one more thing. I know I paused my screen here. Is with that CBP blueprint, I wanted to show this if I had time. Let me see here. All right, you should be able to see that. I have all kinds of great things here, VRA zone and YAML. So any one of those blueprints can be exported to YAML using Cloud Client or the API. The YAML is a single zip file of the entire application, including all dependencies, all software scripts, etc. So let's just go ahead and open up this Duke's Bank one that I just showed you, and we can look at the software component. So there's two here. There's the DB setup, and there's the MySQL. Oh, those are the software components, sorry. Oh, wait, that's just the software component. Let me show you the full machine. Here we go. Here's SQL. In YAML, you can do it the granularity of the individual software component or the completed machine. So before I was showing you just the software component. Here, I've got the software component within the machine and then the blueprint itself. And I can go ahead and open this, and I can edit the entire blueprint. Oh, really? The entire blueprint in YAML format. As soon as Textastic opens up for me. There we go. Okay, so this is the plain text definition of that multi-machine blueprint. And at any given time, I could export this. I can come in here, I can change the descriptor, I can change the name, I could even change the network, I can change the installer, and I can send it over to Imad and say, hey, deploy this into your environment, right? And it's environment agnostic at this point because it's just text. And when Imad imports this using Cloud Client, the whole zip file, he can go and make his changes and immediately turn around and publish it and say, this is what this, what our corporate headquarters has built for us as the standard for all SQL deployments. You just send it around in an email. It's tiny little footprint. What was this one? 6K, right, for an entire SQL definition. So that is as much time as I can spend, as much time as I had for CBP. Now, what happens next is a lot of fun as well. So how do we go and add in extensibility and start plugging into the entire ecosystem? How do I trigger external workflows and integration points based on a software component, based on how it's being requested? And some of the other use cases I'm working on, and the BU has kind of put out there and started demoing already, well, not out there meaning internally, is how do I take what we can do with YAML, what we can do with versioning, what we can do with app authoring, and what we can do with extensibility using the event broker, and do things like Git repositories, or incorporate Git repositories. So now I have a trigger, and again, we're probably going to have a follow-up session on extensibility, but we have a trigger subscription that says anytime any blueprint is edited, or this one specific blueprint, or this one person editing any given blueprint, or group, or whatever, you get it, makes any change to this blueprint, version it, export it to YAML, and send it to Git. In the reverse, anytime anything is changed at Git, import it and publish it as a new version in my catalog. So now we have release automation, we have versioning, all of that stuff built in at zero additional licensing costs once you get to the appropriate enterprise license level. If you're doing app authoring, from a blueprint perspective, an event broker, that's included in advanced as well. So the use cases here are going to be pretty phenomenal. We're going to see a lot of things blow up. We're putting a lot of great things out there. I'm slowly inching out my my Spotlight series, and then of course you're going to see a lot more from the broader community and your expected characters to put a lot of this content out there as well. So stay tuned. Great things coming, and we're looking forward to a follow-up that's going to start. Hopefully we can spotlight some of the other key components. This is just one of many. Back to you, Imad.
All right, man. Well, appreciate it. This was a lot of great content. By the way, you're on the hook for the series. You know that, right?
Yeah, me and John, I think. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Fraps, you have anything you want to add before we hit the end record?
I do not, just other than a huge thank you. I'm super excited about that, the new blueprints. I can't wait to get my hands on that.
Absolutely, man. And we're looking forward to a whole lot more. I'm like super excited. I wanted to get everything done today, right? But I can spend a whole hour on the APIs. I can spend a whole hour on Cloud Client, a whole hour on Event Broker. I can spend a whole day on Event Broker. All of this stuff is just changing everything, in my opinion. And yes, I'm a big advocate of what we do, of course, naturally. But seriously, this is some pretty awesome stuff. Super excited about it, and look for the GA code to be available mid this month.
It's recorded now, so you can't get out of this.
Sometime this month.
It's too late.
No year or month mentioned. Yeah, we'll be all right. We'll be all right.
All right. With that said, thanks a lot, and we're going to go ahead and hit end on the recording.